A tranquil day at the office. The early morning sun filtered through the broad glass windows of Dynatech's downtown high-rise, painting every surface in a soft, golden hue. Mark Thompson arrived at his floor with 5 minutes to spare, as always. In his navy blazer and crisp white shirt, he looked every bit the seasoned project manager, calm, collected, meticulous. He offered a polite nod to the receptionist, Brenda, whose chipper "Good morning, Mark" he'd grown accustomed to over the years. The hum of printers, buzz of distant phones, and click-clack of keyboards greeted him as he stepped into the open-plan office. His cubicle was tucked into the corner, a spot he'd claimed long ago for its proximity to the window and its rare sliver of quiet. On his desk sat a picture of his wife, Nora, and their daughter, Lily. Faces that always reminded him why he worked so hard, even when the days grew long and the projects piled up. Mark made a ritual of starting his day with a mug of black coffee, no sugar, no cream, and reviewing his inbox before the morning stand-up. As he sipped, his eyes swept over the neat rows of emails, flagging anything from clients or upper management. Everything was under control. He prided himself on never missing a deadline or letting details slip through the cracks. Colleagues drifted in, exchanging half-awake greetings. Dave from IT waved as he passed by, juggling 2 laptops under his arm. "Hey, Mark, big game last night, huh?" Mark grinned. "Guess we'll be talking about those missed chances all week." To many in the office, Mark was more than a manager. He was the steady anchor, the one people turned to when deadlines loomed or tempers frayed. He had a quiet way of solving problems, never barking orders, just asking the right questions and nudging people in the right direction. The morning stand-up was brisk. Mark outlined the day's priorities, listened to updates, and resolved a minor mix-up with the Anderson file. No crisis, no drama. A sharp contrast to the storm that would soon upend everything. As he settled in to start the day's main tasks, Mark allowed himself a moment to appreciate the serenity. The air carried a sense of routine, of reliability. There was quickly, maybe a little too quickly. He had a habit of laughing just a bit too loud at the boss's jokes or echoing management's opinions with slick precision. Mark, ever the observer, watched as Sam flattered his way around the room, dropping clever comments and sidling up to the people who mattered. "Hey, Mark," Sam said, sliding into the cubicle next to his after the meeting. "I heard you're the guy to go to if you want to get things done around here." Mark smiled with polite reserve. "I try my best. Let me know if you need anything." But in the days that followed, Mark began to feel a subtle shift. Sam was always nearby, somehow ending up copied on key emails or chiming in during calls that never used to interest him before. When Mark took the lead on a new client proposal, Sam managed to insert himself into the process, offering suggestions with an insistent energy that bordered on agitation. It wasn't long before Mark overheard snippets of conversation near the water cooler. Small things at first, nothing he could point to directly. "Sam's been really impressive lately," said Lisa from marketing. "He's got some fresh ideas," Dave replied, voice tinged with something like admiration. During a routine check-in, Mr. Peters asked Mark what he thought of the new guy. Mark hesitated. "He seems motivated," he said carefully, "eager to jump in." Mr. Peters only nodded, making a note on his pad. By the end of the week, it became clear Sam wasn't just eager, he was ambitious. He volunteered for late nights, stayed behind after meetings for one-on-one conversations with the boss, and seemed to have an uncanny knack for knowing which projects would be most visible. Mark tried not to let it bother him. After all, a little healthy competition could keep the team sharp, yet a faint unease settled in his chest. One morning, Mark found a file on his desk with a sticky note attached. "Mark, please review for errors. Sam." He frowned, flipping through the packet. The figures were off, numbers transposed. It was unlike Sam to be careless, and yet, when Mark brought it up later, Sam only grinned. "Sorry, man. Must have been a long night." At home that evening, Mark told Nora about his new coworker while scraping leftovers into the trash. Maybe he's just trying too hard, she suggested. Sam, for his part, had mastered subtlety. In meetings, he nodded encouragingly when Mark spoke, jotting notes as if every word was gold. But outside those meetings, Sam's influence spread in ways that left Mark feeling boxed in. He noticed Sam whispering with Lisa from marketing, then later found out she'd pulled out of a joint project with oddly vague excuses. One morning, Dave from IT stopped by Mark's desk with a heap of frustration in his voice. "Hey Mark, just a heads up. Sam's been asking about the client database," Dave said, dropping his voice. He shot a quick look around. "He wanted access to old files. Anything going on I should know about?" Mark shook his head, masking his concern. "Just tell him to go through the proper channels." But it didn't end there. Over lunch, Mark overheard two colleagues at the next table talking about a screw-up on the Simpson account. His name came up, their voices dropping in awkward hush as he passed. Later that afternoon, Mark found himself quietly pulled into Mr. Peters' glass-walled office. Sunlight streamed in, but the space felt cold. "Mark, we'll need a status update on the Simpson file," Mr. Peters said, his tone flatter than usual. "I'm getting mixed signals and want to make sure everything's shipshape. Sam mentioned some inconsistencies in your last draft." Mark's jaw tightened. "All the figures were verified," he said calmly. "I can walk you through them if you'd like." Mr. Peters nodded, distracted. "Just double-check everything, all right? I'm sure it's nothing." After the meeting, Mark returned to his desk, sifting through his work. He replayed every step, every entry. Everything appeared clean. But the whispers lingered, the self-doubt gnawed at him. He remembered Sam's sticky note from last week, the incorrect figures. Was someone sabotaging the accounts? The suspicion festered. A few days later, as Mark was finishing up late, he caught a glimpse of Sam in the empty conference room talking on his cell phone in a low, urgent tone. The door was slightly ajar. "No, it's working just like we planned. He doesn't suspect a thing." "Yeah, I'll make sure the file's ready by Thursday." "Don't worry, they'll pin it on him." Mark, stranger in his own company, the sturdy ground beneath his feet beginning to crumble. He knew he'd have to fight back, but first, he had to survive the storm gathering above. Accused. It happened on an ordinary Thursday, with rain streaming down the windows and the monotony of work filling the office with a dull hush. Mark was at his desk, headphones in, reviewing a presentation for tomorrow's client call when the email came in. The subject line was curt. "Urgent. Meet in conference room C." He barely had time to wonder before Brenda appeared at his cubicle, grave-faced. "Mr. Peters needs you right away." Conference room C was already occupied. Mr. Peters sat at the head of the table, flanked by Linda from HR and Sam, who stared hard at his tablet. A thick folder lay in front of the boss, the top stamped "Confidential" in red ink. "Have a seat, Mark," said Mr. Peters, his usual warmth nowhere to be found. Mark's heart thudded. He sat. Rain thudded on the glass. The silence was suffocating. "We've come across some troubling discrepancies in the Simpson account," Mr. Peters began, sliding the folder toward Mark. "There are missing documents, and the latest records—" He hesitated, glancing at Linda. "They've been altered. Even worse, a message was sent to the client disclosing confidential information. It came from your credentials." Mark blinked, blindsided. "That's impossible. I've never—" Sam interrupted, his tone measured but biting. "IT confirmed the account used was Mark's. I found the issues while double-checking the files for tomorrow's client call." Mark stared at the prints in front of him. Altered contract proposals. Deleted email threads. Things he'd never touched. His own username was marked in digital ink, an inescapable trail. There must be some mistake. Mark tried to keep his voice steady. Someone could have used my computer, or my password. Linda spoke next, quietly, as if reading from a script. Mark, per company protocol, we're placing you on immediate administrative out. Expelled not for incompetence or carelessness, but as a traitor, suspected of betraying his company's trust. He sat in his car for a long time, hands clamped to the steering wheel, replaying every step over and over. He thought of Nora, of explaining the inexplicable, of Lily, whose drawing still sat clipped to his computer screen. How did it come to this? How could so many years of diligent, loyal work be erased by a couple of forged files and a few suspicious clicks? But even in the numb ache of disbelief, something else stirred inside him, a simmering resolve. He didn't know how yet, but he would clear his name. He owed it to himself and to everyone who ever relied on him, not to go down without a fight. The defining decision. Mark drove home in silence, windshield wipers smearing the endless drizzle across the glass. Every muscle in his body felt rigid, as if the accusation had encoded itself in his bones. By the time he pulled into his driveway, darkness had settled, soft porch light casting strange shadows onto the lawn. Nora met him at the door. She saw the truth before he spoke a word. "What happened?" she whispered, ushering him inside, arms wrapping around his cold frame. He wanted to be strong. He wanted to have answers, but all he had were broken fragments of trust, of certainty. "They suspended me, said I leaked client files, tampered with records." His voice was hoarse. "They made it official. He couldn't finish. Nora led him to the couch. She held his hand in both of hers, tried to steady his trembling fingers. The clock ticked. Somewhere upstairs, Lily's laughter drifted down from her bedroom. Mark stared at the carpet, numb. He knew what this meant, not just the humiliation, but the financial consequences they could not afford. Mortgage payments, Lily's tuition, Nora's freelance gigs that only went so far. "I just don't understand," Mark said quietly. "After all those company systems during this investigation, expect an update within 10 business days."
He wasn't just suspended. He was isolated, exiled from the routine that defined him. Over coffee, he made a decision. He refused to disappear in shame. If he let the story stand, if he didn't push back, the accusation would become truth in everyone's mind. His reputation, his life, would be ruined. He spent the day listing everything. Who'd had access to his workstation? Who stood to benefit from framing him? Somewhere in the back of his mind, amid the hurt, a small flame of determination began to flicker to life. That evening, he made a promise to Nora and to himself. "I won't let them do this. No matter what it takes, I'm going to prove I didn't do it. I'll get my name back." Nora nodded, eyes brimming with hope and fear. It was a vow he intended to keep. Digging for the truth. Mark awoke the next morning with a new clarity, sharpened by desperation. The world, stripped of his morning routine, the commute, the hot office coffee, the flurry of emails, felt both wide open and suddenly treacherous. Instead of retreating, Mark resolved to act. After Nora and Lily left for the day, Mark set up a command center at the kitchen table. His old personal laptop, scratch pads filled with bullet points, a mug of black coffee gone cold. He combed through memories like a detective, plotting a timeline from weeks before the incident up until the suspension. Meetings, emails, hallway conversations. It all felt significant now. There were too many dead ends, but some pieces started to click. It wasn't just Sam's rise or the strange accidents with files. Mark remembered a late night when he found his computer still logged in, though he could have sworn he'd locked it. There was the time Sam offered to handle the Anderson proposal revisions to take something off your plate, Mark. And Lisa from marketing had grown distant after a lunch break interrupted by a call from Sam. Were these coincidences or careful steps? He reached out to Dave from IT, framing it as a friendly check-in. "Hope everything's all right, Mark," Dave replied, concern clear in his text. "Any chance you remember who logged on to my workstation app?"
He said Peters asked for them, but I never checked. I'm sorry, Mark. I didn't want to get involved. Lisa's admission wasn't a confession, but it was more than Mark had hoped for. He thanked her and left, a blueprint forming in his mind. Sam wasn't working alone. He was quietly building alliances and manipulating people who might never have suspected they were pawns. That evening, at home, Mark sifted again through every email, every calendar reminder, every detail. The fragments began to form a pattern. For the first time in days, hope flickered. It was faint, but real. If he was going to prove his innocence, he'd have to gather everything, find the right allies, and get a step ahead of Sam's schemes. As darkness fell, Mark felt wary but determined. A storm had overtaken his life, but now, armed with truth and resolve, he was ready to fight his way out. Allies in the shadows. Mark's conviction solidified as Saturday morning sunlight crept through the blinds. The kitchen table became his war room, papers and scribbled notes spreading outward in small islands of hope. But as determined as he felt to fight, he knew this was not a battle he could win alone. His instincts told him to call Dave from IT, the one person who hadn't looked away, who quietly risked bending the rules to nudge Mark toward the truth. He dialed, heart pounding. "Hey, Dave, I need your help, but off the record. Someone's setting me up, and I think you know it's true. Can we talk?" A moment's silence, then Dave's low voice. "Tell me what you need." They met in the parking lot of an old strip mall outside the city limits. Dave perched nervously on the tailgate of his battered pickup. "This is risky," Dave muttered, glancing around. "But I checked again. There were logins from Sam's account on your workstation, too. Always late, after you'd logged out for the day. I tried to pull the security camera footage, but IT locked down the request. Someone's watching." Mark nodded grimly, shaky but invigorating. The first cracks appeared in the wall Sam had built around his deception. Over microwave dinner that night, Mark quietly recounted what had happened to Nora. "People are coming around," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "I think I'm finally getting through." Nora smiled, pride chasing away a shadow of worry. "Sometimes it just takes one person to light the way for the rest." By Monday, Mark had compiled proof. Login data showing Sam's after-hours activity, emails Lisa and Julia had forwarded, the pattern of tampered files. It was a fragile case, not yet bulletproof, but it was no longer a story of one man's paranoia. Mark composed a careful email, not to HR this time, but to Mr. Peters himself. Attached were the logs, the witness statements, even the flagged permissions request. His hands trembled as he typed a subject line. critical evidence regarding Simpson account incident. He hesitated only a moment before clicking send. Now, the fight was out in the open, and for the first time since this nightmare began, Mark felt the world shift back ever so slightly in his favor. He had allies, and now, maybe, a chance at justice. By early Tuesday morning, Mark was wide awake before the world stirred. The email to Mr. Peters haunted him, the proof he'd assembled, the alliances he'd forged in secret. Each second felt fragile, poised between vindication and disaster. He paced the living room while sunlight crept across the hardwood, phone gripped tight in one clammy hand. Would Peters even see the message, or would it get buried in the endless stream of reports and urgent company chatter? Every passing hour twisted a knot tighter in Mark's chest. At 10:17 a.m., his phone rang. Unknown number. He braced himself and answered.
Mark, it's Mr. Peters. Can you come in today? Conference room A, noon sharp, and bring any remaining evidence you have.
Mark's relief was cautious, edged with dread. This was the moment he'd waited for, and there would be no turning back. He arrived 15 minutes early, clutching a thin folder. Security logs and camera requests corroborate that Sam had both opportunity and motive. Mr. Peters read through the files, furrowing his brow. Linda did the same, lips pursed. Mark caught a fleeting expression on Sam's face, impatience, then something colder. Sam tried to shrug it off. Anyone could have made a mistake with permissions. Maybe IT has it wrong. I was just being thorough, covering for Mark's lapses. Those lapses only started after you gained access, Mark replied, his voice steady but forceful. Lisa and Julia are both willing to testify. Check their emails with your own logs. I did not sabotage the Simpson account. Someone else did. Silence thudded between them, heavy and expectant. Mr. Peters searched Mark's face, then Sam's. After almost a minute, he stood. I will conduct a full review, he said, tone suddenly steely. If what you say is true, Mark, the record will reflect it. If not, we'll proceed accordingly. Linda, please notify IT that we want all relevant logs pulled and reviewed by outside counsel. No more internal handling. Sam's fingers clenched imperceptibly at his side. If he had a retort, he swallowed it. Mark rose, dignity restored by the slimmest thread of hope. He didn't feel triumphant yet, just exhausted, aching to get home. To tell Nora the truth was finally breaking the surface. As the elevator door closed behind him, the office felt lighter, not free of secrets yet, but no longer suffocating. For the first time in weeks, Mark allowed himself a pale smile. He had spoken up. He had been heard. And somewhere beyond this storm, vindication felt suddenly possible. Turning tides. The days that followed were a strange mix of suspense and quiet determination. For the first time since it had all begun, Mark was able to breathe, not freely, but with stubborn hope. Waiting was torture. Each phone call or email set his pulse racing, but he had done all he could. Now the burden was on others to seek out the truth. At home, he pulled closer to Nora and Lily. Evenings were spent on the porch, sharing small victories and worries that lingered, unspoken or softly voiced, together. Conference room A was busier than before. Mr. Peters was joined by Linda, a company attorney, and, most surprisingly, David from IT, hands folded and serious. Mr. Peters stood, voice measured but clear. Mark, thank you for coming. After a thorough external review, we have determined your account was accessed without permission on multiple occasions. He paused, then continued. Sam is no longer with the company pending further investigation. Your name will be cleared, and we're sincerely sorry for the stress and harm this process has caused you. Nora reached for Mark's hand, relief blooming in her eyes. The attorney added, "You're being fully reinstated, with back pay for your time on leave, and you will receive a formal letter of apology. Your reputation will not be tarnished by these events." Mark let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Gratitude welled up inside him, not just relief, but the sense that his determination and the courage of those who stood by him had truly made a difference. Mr. Peters continued, more quietly, "We're reviewing our internal protocols to ensure this never happens again. You have our apologies, Mark. Genuine ones." After the meeting, colleagues offered handshakes and awkward smiles, some genuine, some tinged with guilt for having doubted him. Lisa and Julia caught his eye in the hallway. Lisa mouthed, "You did it." Dave gave a subtle thumbs up. Back home, Mark hugged Nora and Lily, his voice choked with emotion. "It's over. We can start again." That night, Mark savored the kind of sleep he hadn't known in weeks, the sleep of a man who, at last, had been vindicated. The storm hadn't broken him. It had remade him, strong and unafraid. Chapter 15's. What Mark hadn't expected was how different everything would feel now that the crisis was over. Vindication brought relief and gratitude, but also a sense of uncertainty, as if stepping onto unfamiliar ground after a long, violent storm. Returning to the office, Mark noticed him. Outside the office, life took on a new sharpness. Dinners with Nora and Lily felt richer, every ordinary moment a quiet victory. Nora encouraged him to dream again, to consider possibilities he once ignored. "One door closes, another opens," she said one rainy evening. "What do you want now, Mark, really?" He thought about that question as autumn pressed in, leaves spinning down like memories he could finally let go of. The company wanted him to lead a new project, to use his experience to help overhaul the firm's security policy and culture. It was a challenge, but it felt different now. Less about rescuing his own name, more about protecting others from the trials he'd endured. Mark accepted, eager but cautious. In collaboration with Dave and Julia, he began to draft new guidelines, determined to build a workplace where trust was more than just a word in a mission statement. He called for transparency, for a real commitment to ethics, and found, a little to his surprise, that people listened. His scars, once invisible, had become a strength. Gradually, life settled into an honest routine. The pain of betrayal faded, replaced by the satisfaction of rebuilding. Mark never forgot what he'd gone through, but he no longer let it define him. One Saturday morning, as Lily sketched at the kitchen table and Nora brewed coffee, Mark felt a quiet, expansive peace wash over him. The future was still uncertain, but it was his to shape. For the first time in a long while, hope didn't feel fragile. It felt like the start of something real. Second chances. Months slipped by, marked not by tension, but by slow, steady growth. Mark's world, once shrunken by suspicion and anxiety, opened in unexpected directions. The scars from his ordeal had faded, leaving behind a quiet wisdom that shaped how he faced each new day. The project Mark had agreed to lead became more than just a professional assignment. It was a crusade. He worked closely with Dave and Julia, building a blueprint for a workplace rooted in accountability and real communication. Staff meetings were livelier now, blossomed in this gentler spring. One afternoon, Mark found himself at a career fair, representing the company's renewed vision. He spoke earnestly to young graduates, drawing on his own hardship not as caution, but as inspiration. "You will meet challenges you don't expect," he told a crowd of eager faces. "But honesty isn't weakness, it's your strongest armor." Afterward, a quiet young man lingered. "How did you keep going when nobody believed you?" Mark smiled, the answer emerging easily now. "I found people who cared. I learned to speak up, even when it scared me, and I never let someone else's lies become my truth." Weeks later, Mark returned from work to find Lily's drawing pinned to the fridge. 3 small figures, all holding hands under a bright sunrise. In Lily's neat printing, she'd written, "My family is strong." Mark studied the drawing and felt a wave of gratitude. He realized his story wasn't only about vindication or survival. It was also about the courage to begin again, to trust again. The future remained uncertain, colored by new beginnings and chances yet to be taken. But Mark no longer feared the unknown. He greeted each day, its light, its shadows, its promise, with resolve and hope. For at last he knew, second chances are not given but earned, and in earning his, he had become most himself. The ripple effect. The first anniversary of Mark's ordeal arrived quietly, without fanfare. Yet as autumn sunlight spilled across his desk, he could sense how much had shifted, not only for himself, but for those around him. His transformation echoed outward, subtle at first, then unmistakable, a ripple effect that touched every corner of his life. The company's atmosphere had warmed, even as work remained demanding. Mistakes were discussed openly, not hidden. A culture of shared responsibility flourished, and Mark saw new faces rise with confidence he'd once only hoped for. In weekly meetings, Lisa and Julia thrived, their voices strong with the knowledge they'd help spark real change. New hires approached Mark for mentorship, eager for advice or a listening ear. He obliged with patience and honesty, sneaked out late at night to sit beside her father on the porch steps, staring at stars and dreaming aloud about her own future. One Saturday, the company hosted its annual retreat at a lakeside lodge. Mark, hesitant at first, chose to attend. Surrounded by colleagues, old and new, he marveled at how far he had come. He watched Lisa organize the team-building games, Julia chat animatedly by the fire, and Dave challenge interns to a canoe race. Mark felt less like an outsider and more like a keystone, part of a structure he'd helped save from collapse. After dinner, Mr. Peters gave a short speech. "We are stronger for the trials we have faced," he said, eyes lingering on Mark for a moment longer than necessary. "We have learned from our mistakes, and from those among us who refused to give up." Quiet applause filled the room, genuine and reverent. Later that night, as embers flickered and laughter drifted through the lodge, Mark stood by the water, the moon mirrored in the still lake. Nora joined him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "Did you ever imagine it would turn out like this?" she whispered. Mark shook his head, tracing circles in the cold sand with his shoe. "No," he said softly, "but I'm grateful every day that it did." The future stretched fast before him, mysterious and bright. Mark no longer feared the unforeseen. He had been tested and changed, his truth sending ripples that would last, long after the storm itself had passed. And at last, he was at peace,